Today's show is brought to you by Amrita Health Foods. To get your high protein bars, superfood bars, variety packs, or the new minis, check out amritahealthfoods.com and enter Plant Trainers as the promo code to get 15% off your order. And now on to today's show.
Welcome to the Plant Trainers Podcast, where we're helping people improve their quality of life through nutrition and fitness. And now, your hosts, nutrition and wellness coaches, international speakers, Adam and Shoshana Chaim.
Hey, I'm Adam Chaim.
And I'm Shoshana Chaim, and we are
Propelled by Plants. Today we bring to you episode 225, Diagnosis Dystonia with Tom Seaman.
In today's episode of the Plant Trainers Podcast, we talk about dystonia with Tom Seaman. Dystonia is a neurological movement disorder that many people, including ourselves, have not heard of before. We found it interesting to hear Tom talk about his journey that dystonia has taken him on. We believe his story is inspiring to all that find themselves living with chronic pain or who are unable to physically move throughout life the way that they want to. His openness and honesty was raw, and we really appreciate how he was able to talk about the emotional trauma that was paired with his physical challenges. I know that we've said it before, but this podcast must be shared with anyone who could benefit from getting just a glimpse of inspiration or hope because their story is similar to Tom's. We hope that this podcast will make it into the hands of people who are living undiagnosed with dystonia and that they will be able to make massive changes and find better coping skills to improve their quality of life.
Tom Seaman is a chronic pain and dystonia awareness advocate, health blogger, motivational speaker, and author of the book Diagnosis Dystonia, Navigating the Journey, a comprehensive resource for anyone living with any chronic condition or other life challenge. He's also a certified professional life coach in the area of health and wellness. Tom volunteers for the Dystonia Medical Research Foundation as a support group leader. He also volunteers with Wago Health as a patient expert panelist, and he's a member and writer for the Chronic Illness Bloggers Network.
We'd like to welcome everyone, whether you're a new listener or you've been with us from the beginning. Regardless, we're so grateful that you're here listening today. And a special shout out to our Patreon contributors. We wanted to let you know that we've made a few changes for all of our plentiful Patreon peeps. For those of you who don't know what Patreon is, it's a simple way for you to contribute to the Plant Trainers Podcast every month, get super cool exclusive rewards in return. You'll love the perks at patreon.com/planttrainers. These contributions allow us to grow the podcast, expand our team, and create more awesome content for you. Even contributing $1 a month really helps, and it makes a big difference. We get a lot of feedback on our Instagram stories that Adam puts out all the time. Often people feel like goals are hard to achieve, it's useless putting in the effort, or everyone else is able to make things happen, but they can't. Adam gives you motivation as well as his raw emotion and experiences to help you along the way on your journey. So what we've done is turned last month's stories into our monthly motivation compilation. It's a YouTube video for all of our Patreons who are contributing at least $3. It's worth the value right there. And then some. So if you don't get onto Instagram every 24 hours before it disappears to check out Adam's spiel, consider being a patron and get it all delivered into your inbox each month. You could find the links to Patreon and to work with us on our website and in our show notes.
And now for a moment of gratitude.
Most of the leaves have fallen off the trees up here in Toronto, Canada, but I'm very grateful for the season of fall. I really do enjoy it. Although I don't enjoy being cold, I enjoy how all the leaves change colors, and I find that very magical, and I just love looking at it. So I'm grateful for the opportunity to live here in a city that has such a beautiful season.
In a few days, I'll be getting on a plane to go to Ecuador and learn and live with a different culture and help them build homes there. And I'm really excited for that opportunity and grateful that I've been asked to do this. So it's going to be an awesome experience that I look forward to sharing with all of you when I get back.
Tom Seaman, thanks so much for joining us on the Plant Trainers Podcast today.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Do you have a moment of gratitude that you'd like to share with us?
I do. Actually, it's this very moment right now. It's the opportunity that to talk with you guys, to share with you some of the things about dystonia and chronic pain and the work I do, my personal story and how I've worked through a lot of challenges in my life and am now helping others do the same. So I want to thank you guys.
Thank you so much. And we're grateful that you're here with us. And we were just talking a couple of minutes ago that I have no idea how I came across you in any way, shape, or form. But when I do see people of inspiration, I often screenshot them on my computer or my iPad or my phone, wherever I am. And I came across something that I screenshotted quite a while ago. And I guess I had looked into your story and thought it was quite interesting. And we are really excited to have you on here, especially talking about dystonia, because it's something that we had never really heard about before, but it is quite common and it is coming up more. So maybe you could tell our listeners a little bit of what dystonia is.
Sure, I'd be happy to. It's actually, it is more common than people are aware, but not many people have heard about it. Dystonia, it's a neurological movement disorder. So neurological, of course, meaning that it affects the nervous system. So what's basically happening is there are faulty messages in the brain that send signals to muscles telling them to involuntarily contract. And so what this ends up causing is a lot of unwanted repetitive movements, muscle twisting, muscle tremoring, and abnormal and awkward postures. And of course, this creates for most people pain from mild to severe to absolutely debilitating. It can affect any part of the body, and it's classified based on different parts of the body that are affected. In my case, it affects my neck, so it's called cervical dystonia.
And how did you figure out that you had dystonia, if it's not so common?
Well, I went to the University of Google. Actually, Google didn't exist at the time. But I hit the internet because I ran into so many closed doors because very few people had any idea what it was. I shouldn't say they didn't know what dystonia was. Well, they didn't know what dystonia was, most people I saw, but they didn't know what my symptoms were and couldn't really properly diagnose me. So I went to about, I'd say roughly 15 different doctors and therapists, and nobody could really say what it was. They were just kind of treating my symptoms, and in many cases, what they were treating was making me worse. And so I kind of had enough, and I just hopped online and I began putting in symptoms and things, and all of a sudden what popped up was actually spasmodic torticollis, which is another name for cervical dystonia. And when I saw the pictures and I saw the descriptions, it was like I was looking at myself, and I realized this is probably what I had. And so I took that information and I went to a neurologist, and the neurologist then confirmed my diagnosis.
So is this something that people are born with? I believe this is a chronic illness or disorder. Did you have this your entire life and then figure out what to do about it? Or did it come up at a certain age? Does it hit people at a certain time in their lives for a specific reason? I know that's a lot of questions, but maybe you could pick them apart.
Well, actually, it's all of the above. In my particular case, I was not born with it. I developed it when I was 30. I had just gotten back to graduate school. I graduated from college, and then I went to business for 6 years, and I wanted to go back to school for my master's degree in counseling. And that's when very mild symptoms began. And the symptoms for me were my head began to tilt to one side, and I couldn't control it. It was like I had lost neck strength. It was like no muscle strength in my neck. So my neck began to pull to the side a little bit. And then it got to be where the muscles were contracting, and it was like somebody had a rope tied around my head, and it was pulling me to the side and turning me to the side. So I was like I was locked at like a 45-degree angle towards my right shoulder. So it progressed like that over a period of time. So it came on for me very gradually, and then it got really severe. But there are people that are born with it. So there's a genetic component for some people. I don't know the percentages, somewhere, maybe 10 to 15% have a genetic, it's called genetic dystonia. And in my case, it's idiopathic. And the other classification or other group would be acquired. And so there are people who may have damage to their central nervous system. There may be a birth injury of some kind, like hypoxia or some kind of neonatal brain hemorrhage. People who have infections, there's reactions to certain recreational and prescription drugs. exposure to heavy metal, carbon monoxide poisoning, things like that, and or physical and emotional trauma or injury. That can oftentimes have a direct cause and effect relationship, or you can have, say, damage to your central nervous system, say, like in my case. I don't know the exact cause, but I can go back to when I was 9 or 10 and I had severe head damage. I had head trauma a couple of times when I was 9. And then I had some seizures when I was in college. And so I had neurological disorders, neurological conditions going on throughout much of my life, but dystonia did not manifest until I was 30.
So it's possible that it was there and manageable for a very long time, and then something happened to make it unmanageable, or to make it the presence bigger, for example, going back to school and having that stress or something like that.
It's very possible that it lay dormant for many years, and it was something I was predisposed to, and something just triggered it. And I don't know what that was. I can point to a bunch of different factors, but I really don't know for sure. But yeah, that's very possible.
So how often do you think it's underdiagnosed? You're saying that the doctors didn't really find it until you found it on the internet. So are there stats on that? Because
not really in terms of how many people are underdiagnosed, because we're not even sure how many people are actually diagnosed. The estimates are between 300 to 500,000 in North America and about 1 million worldwide. And those are considered to be kind of low because it's believed because there are many who are undiagnosed, like I was for such a long period of time, and there are many who are misdiagnosed. And so the belief is that there are far more people suffering with this than these statistics are showing.
And does the diagnosis in the end game, because we're going to talk a lot about how you've turned your life around, how you manage the pain, how you help other people, is the diagnosis, do you think, really that important, or is it the lifestyle and the changes that you make once you're in these situations that are more important?
I think getting the diagnosis is very important because that then leads to appropriate treatments and self-care techniques. And so a combination of those two things. And that's kind of what screwed me really early on, is that I was misdiagnosed and I was mistreated. At least I believe I was. And that's what caused a very rapid, steep decline of my symptoms, from being uncomfortably functional to completely disabled, to where I could not get off my floor because I was in so much writhing pain and could barely sit for more than 10 minutes or stand for more than 10 minutes at a time. And so getting that accurate diagnosis is incredibly important. However, it is possible to maybe ward off the intensity of symptoms if you are living a healthier lifestyle. But the diagnosis is pretty critical.
So let's look at that a little bit more. From the time where you started to feel, did it happen gradually when you started to feel that pain in your neck and then you eventually got stuck in that way? Take us through how, when you first noticed it, to where you were completely, on the bed, not being able to get up, and walk us through that emotionally and physically.
Sure. Well, like I said, I had returned to school for my master's degree. So it was about a month prior to that when I began to notice that I had some restricted neck movement. And I noticed it as I was walking primarily. I also noticed it when I was driving in the car. At the time, I was driving about 4 to 5 hours a couple times a week back and forth to my apartment that I was moving into from where I was living. And I just kind of noticed that I just felt off center and off balanced. And when I was walking, I noticed my head would just sort of, with each step, it would flop to the right and then come back to center and then flop to the right. And then when I was sitting at work and in school, I noticed that I could feel like my muscles were contracting and they were pulling me to my right. And I had to put my hand on my chin and other parts of my face to hold it in place, because it was like something was outside of me that was controlling my body to move in ways I didn't want it to, which is really kind of the nature of what dystonia is. And so that lasted it didn't really get much more severe than that for about 4 months. And I wasn't really in any kind of pain at that point. It was after I returned from Christmas break and I went back and saw the doctor who was treating me, and he said, I'm not really sure what to do for you anymore. I can't really help you. Let me have you see this other guy in town. I went and saw this person, and they did some treatments on me that were just really put me over the edge. In about 2 to 3 weeks, I went from, on a scale of 1 to 10, from about a 2 or a 3 to about a 12. And it just knocked me out, and I literally could not basically, I really couldn't do anything. I was in that much pain, and my spasms, and I wouldn't even call them spasms so much as I would, very forceful muscle contractions. It felt like somebody had a drill in the back of my skull. It's kind of like the pain. The pain of it, like when you injure yourself, that moment of like breathtaking, that pain that just takes your breath away. That's how it felt for me over and over and over. So it's like I was constantly being injured, and I was having difficulty speaking because I was always catching my breath. And I did anything and everything I could to try and get comfortable, which just was basically laying on the floor, just literally rolling around as if somebody was beating me. I just couldn't get any kind of comfort whatsoever.
Did you see this as chronic, or did you think it was more like when your back goes out and that in a couple of weeks you'd be back to normal life again?
At first, I thought it was temporary. I thought this was something that I could, and I was told by almost everyone that I went to who didn't really know what was wrong with me, and none of us did, so I can't fault them. And I was told that, we can, we can fix this. We'll work on this aspect of you. We'll get you going in 3 months, 6 months. You'll be fine. So I had this hope that I'd be getting better and it wouldn't be long term. And then I began to learn more about what this was after I got the diagnosis. And I found out that there is no cure for it, that it is something that you will probably live for with the rest of your life unless you have a remission or you're able to find ways to manage it. And that's when the emotional stuff that you asked about before, that's when the emotional stuff really kicked in, and I began to feel incredibly, I was very confused at first. I became very sad. I was scared. I didn't know what the future held for me. I didn't know, how could I possibly live a life like this all the time in this kind of pain and inability to take care of myself. I couldn't cook, couldn't clean, couldn't do my laundry, couldn't really do anything. And I said, well, what is this going to mean for my life and my career and everything? So I just felt incredibly helpless and hopeless, and I was filled with so much anger and frustration. And I felt very, very alone because very few people really knew what it was that I was going through and understood what dystonia was. So it was an extremely difficult time for me. It was as if it felt like my life was over. I know that sounds melodramatic, but that's how it felt. It was as if there was no hope, and I just wasn't ever going to get better.
I'm glad you just shared that. It sounds like you may have been going through some depression.
Big time.
And so when somebody gets to that state, I'd love to know, maybe you could share how you personally were able to find the strength within yourself to make a switch and get yourself out of that depression and move into a place where you're able to actually help yourself.
It took a lot of years, and it took a lot of going through the grief process because I felt like I lost everything. And in some ways, I did lose a lot of things. I couldn't work anymore. I couldn't travel. I had lost my social life. A lot of my friends were gone. I lost all my money. I lost what felt like any freedom of any kind. And so, not being able to function, I ended up actually moving in with my parents because I couldn't financially support myself, and physically I was unable to take care of myself. And so I went through years of major depression, major anxiety, and like I said before, I felt hopeless, and I wanted to do anything and everything I possibly could to eliminate the mental and psychological, or the mental and physical pain. And so one of the things I did is I drank alcohol to medicate myself. I had an awful diet. I ended up gaining 150 pounds over about a 5-year period. And it was during that 5-year period that I just grieved, and I was loaded and I was just full of anger. And what actually happened, which was kind of interesting and a blessing in disguise, and this is where the transformation took place, I ended up getting sick with a stomach virus. And so I was stuck in bed, and it was a pretty bad one. I was stuck in bed for either bed or the bathroom, basically, for about 10 days, almost 2 weeks. And I couldn't eat anything, couldn't drink, couldn't really do much of anything. And it was during that period of time when I was really stuck with my thoughts. And I knew that this was a moment for me to make a choice. Do I continue when I get better? Do I continue with this destructive lifestyle, or do I take a chance at getting better? Because like I said, I didn't feel that there was any hope that I could get better. but do I give it a shot? And I decided that's what I wanted to do. I didn't want to die. I felt like I was killing myself, and I didn't want to die. So I devoted, once the stomach virus took off, I devoted myself very vigilantly to pursuing health, mentally and physically. And the combination of approaching this from a physical standpoint in terms of trying to manage my symptoms and also work through the psychological things helped me. They work together, of course. There's that mind-body connection that they just work well together. And so I took baby steps to get myself out of this. I took inventory of where my life was and where I wanted it to be and what the steps were to get there. And I didn't know if I would get there, but I knew that I had to take that first step. And once I did, I was on the right path. I began to see changes. I began to feel changes physically, mentally, emotionally, psychologically, spiritually. I began to just see changes. And I knew that meant that I was on the right path. And I hung to those things and I built upon those things. And that's what just kept me going, was seeing sustainable changes. As minor as they were massive in the grand scheme of things and based on how I was and how severe it was at one point for so long.
So that's something that I really concentrate on with the people who I coach, and they'll come to me and say, oh my God, I ate a cupcake, or, I let myself go in this area. And I'll say, okay, let's look at every small little challenge that you've overcome. Let's look at every small little, victory that you've had, and no victory is too small. So I think that's really important. That really helps people to get going. But what I wanted to ask about what you just said is, what support did you have in place? Was this researched? Were you coached through it? Were you creating all of this on a whim? How did it happen?
A little bit of both. I mean, the primary support came from my family and some friends who still hung around. A lot of it was reflecting back on some of the work and life experiences that I had as a former athlete. That sounds something I had mentioned, and that was one thing that was really hard for me when I got sick, is that I was a very competitive athlete in many sports. I mean, you could probably, if you would ask me what sport were you not competitive in, that would be, what sport were you competitive in?
Easier question.
Yeah. So what weren't you competitive in would be an easier question to answer. And so I reflected upon, my life in sports and how I persevered during those tough times. And a lot of the work that I used to do the business I was in after college was actually a patient education business in chiropractic and nutrition. And we had a bunch of other businesses as well. We had a nutritional analysis service. We worked in the golf industry, helping people with back pain. And so I began to think about the lifestyle I lived back then before I got sick. And I realized that I needed to return back to that healthier living in order for me to begin, healing myself.
So how does one overcome these physical challenges? Like you said, your neck was leaning to the side, to the right, and your muscles would be contracting or twisting. Like, how does the body overcome that? Do you take medication for it? Do you do it naturally? How did that go?
So why choose Amrita bars? Choose Amrita bars because they are free of the top allergens. All Amrita bars contain no peanuts, no dairy, no eggs, no soy, and no gluten. They're raw, plant-based nutrition, and most of all, they are kid-friendly for a healthier, tastier spin on snack time. Their bars are designed to satisfy even the pickiest of eaters. Adam uses these bars to fuel before, during, and after his workouts, and the kids always want a mini bar when we're out for the day or before they go on to their activities. To get your high-protein bars, superfood bars, variety pack, or their new minis, go to amritahealthfoods.com and enter Plant Trainers as the promo code to get 15% off your order.
Well, I did a lot of different things, and it really varies from person to person in terms of what helps people. And for me, it was a combination of medications, a very targeted stretching and exercise program that I utilized, nutrition, acupuncture, massage, a lot of trigger point tools, stress management, dealing with the physical as well as the emotional things, and trying to be as even keeled as possible. I utilize pool therapy. You know, and it changes. Like I say, it changes. And it has changed over the years. It changes from week to week sometimes, depending on what it is that I'm going through. But that's what's helped me. But that's not really the recipe for everyone. That's the difficulty with a condition like dystonia, and really any kind of a condition, particularly the more rare disorders, because the symptoms are so highly variable, as are the way that we respond to treatments. And so treatments generally for dystonia range anywhere from brain surgery, deep brain stimulation being one of the main ones, down to something as quote unquote simple as breathing exercises, and literally everything in between. And so for me, I didn't do the brain surgery route, but I did a lot of things in between, and I find that a combination of things for me is helpful versus a unimodal approach.
And so, do people overcome dystonia? Is it curable, or does it just get managed throughout one's lifetime?
It's really one that gets managed if you're able to find things to help manage you, and not everyone is able to get better. Some people get worse, some people don't change at all. And then of course there's some who do find things to help manage them. And I've been lucky to find ways to manage things from where I was. I mean, I'm still struggling in a lot of different ways, but yeah, most of the time, it's really just about managing. There's no cure for it. It's just a matter of treating symptoms and finding what is the most effective treatment for the individual.
So on your scale of 2 to 12 that you were once on, where do you find yourself now?
I vary probably between about a 4 and a 6.
And how is that impacting your overall life?
Well, it's a good question, and it's a tough one to answer, because I try and not really I try and get immersed in a lot of the work that I do, and not think about it too much, because I've come to really kind of accept things for as they are, and I've come to kind of accept that things are difficult, and I'm okay with that, and while I'm suffering at times, I've become more okay with that, and getting to that point has been really difficult. So, but in terms of how it impacts my life, I still have muscle spasms. I've got restricted movements and fatigue and imbalance and dizziness and difficulty sleeping at times, and I still have chronic pain. It's just not as severe. So my symptoms are much less than they once were in terms of severity, so I can do a lot more now, but it's just in smaller bites. Because if I push too hard, then I go from a 6 to an 8 or a 9. And if I don't push, which is interesting, is if I don't keep myself managed, I go that direction as well. So it's like finding the right balance of what to do, what not to do.
What you're doing, does that change over time, or has it been the same over 3 years that kind of what it is now, or does it still need to change?
Well, it changes based on how my symptoms have changed and how this has affected me. I've had this for almost 16 years now. So it's my approach has changed dramatically, and I often will just check in with myself and say, okay, what is it that I'm needing right now? Where am I experiencing difficulty that I just can't get over on my own? Do I need to go and see somebody? Do I need to modify the stretching and exercising I'm doing? Do I need to make nutritional adjustments? Is there a trigger in my life that's causing me stress that's aggravating my symptoms, and what is it exactly, and where do I go from here? Do I make a modification to medications? Do I adjust? It's just constantly fine-tuning things.
You mentioned earlier a few ways that you deal with dystonia. You talked a bit about exercise, very briefly, nutrition, and you mentioned stress just now. Are there specific techniques or exercises or nutritional tips or stress-relieving activities that you use or recommend to others with dystonia that are beneficial?
Well, when it comes to stress management, that's a very individual thing. I think it's a matter of finding here's the way I look at stress. And this may sound a little bit strange to some people, but I don't really think there's stress in the world. I think that stress is created in our mind based on how we respond to life events. And so for me, that's where I try and keep my focus. And I try and, when things happen, as opposed to being reactive, try and be proactive or responsive. And that doesn't always work out, of course, but that's how I try and look at things. But there's that in the moment, but there's also things to do to help calm the mind and calm the body. And that, for me, involves meditation, breathing exercises, getting myself out in nature, not getting too caught up with technology. That's the stressor for me. So to have a good balance of work and play, if you will. Nutritionally, I have a very anti-inflammatory approach to nutrition, to try and reduce, which helps to reduce pain. And there are certain things that I certainly avoid, and I think for people with dystonia, and with anyone, quite frankly, but when you look at the condition of dystonia, there are certain things that can certainly drive symptoms, and of course those being stimulants. And so avoiding sugar and avoiding caffeine and things like that, I think, are important for, I'd say not everyone, but for a pretty good majority of people. Anything that drives adrenaline oftentimes will drive symptoms, but it's really the source of adrenaline. So exercise oftentimes is good for us. Not for everyone, but for most of us, exercise is helpful, because I think one of the best things for a movement disorder is actually movement, if you find the right kind of movement for you, because it helps to retrain motor programming in the brain. But you need to be careful in terms of balance. And so adrenaline from that is not so much as damaging as, say, adrenaline from something that you may see on the news that really, really irritates you, or that really bothers you and just gets under your skin. Or maybe there are toxic people in your life that are causing you distress. And so how do we respond to those things are really important. I don't know if I answered your question. I kind of went all over the map there. I apologize.
No, you did. And I think it's interesting because a lot of these things that we just mentioned, the stress, the nutrition, the exercise, these are things that resolve a lot of issues in everybody's daily life, no matter what chronic condition, what illness, what disease they may be facing. These are three staples that significantly can make a difference no matter what the condition is. So yes, it's specific to dystonia, but it's also specific to a lot of other things that people don't realize. So thank you for sharing those things.
And I think you talked about before, in terms of what you do eat, you tend to eat a very anti-inflammatory diet. Yeah. So upping your greens, upping your fruits and vegetables, making sure that you're staying away from fried foods, anything that's going to aggravate the system in that way.
Exactly. Absolutely correct. That's spot on right there. As primarily, fruits, vegetables, nuts. That's my approach.
And then I've watched some of your YouTube videos where you're actually going through using some of the tools that you use to help manage the pain. So you have, can't remember what it's called right now, that cane where you can get into those areas in the back, and you have these really amazing cold and heat warmers that kind of fit onto the neck. So if anybody's looking for more information, then they can check out your YouTube channel. What is that called again?
It's called Dystonia Living. The best thing really to get all the information that I have is to go to my website, which is tomseamancoaching.com. It's actually it's a brand new website. It just came out about a month ago, and that's where I had two other websites, my coaching website and the website for my book. I put all into one place, and on there it also includes all of my videos and all of my blog and all of my articles. I've got articles published all over the place online, and you can find everything. All the links are directly on there. But you can go directly to the YouTube channel or to the website, which is probably easier, just because they're actually right there on the website as well.
And so in your book, which I believe is titled Diagnosis Dystonia, Navigating the Journey, a comprehensive resource for anyone living with any chronic condition or other life challenge, that's a book that's chronicling your experience. Is that what it's about?
Well, it is about dystonia itself. It is about, I do share my story, but the majority of the information is about daily living, and it's about the things that we go through, like Well, it begins with what it is, because a lot of people don't know what it is, and then I share my story just as a foundation so people know where I'm coming from. But the majority of it is about helping people who are suffering, and providing information for coping with pain. And there's information on pain and pain management, dealing with the anger and the fear and the depression, the anxiety, the isolation, stress and stress management, like we were talking about, grief and the grieving process, shame that many people feel. There's a lot of guilt and shame that some people feel when they have a chronic condition. Relationships can also be tarnished. And so I go through not only how to kind of combat those things, I give an explanation of what those things all are and how they manifest in the body, so that there's an understanding about what's actually happening, and so that the steps that are taken actually mean something. So it's not like I can say, well, you're in pain, okay, well, do this and do that. Well, here's why you're experiencing pain, and here's what's happening in your body, so that there's an understanding, and so that the steps that are being taken kind of, there's a reason for doing it, because there's a greater understanding.
Sounds like an important resource, and we'll put a link in our show notes to your book and to your website and all your other YouTube videos and links, so that people can get access to that. Cool. And before we let you go today, it would be great if you could maybe share some tips that people can use right now if they know somebody that they love, somebody that they know that may be suffering from dystonia. What could they do to help that person?
Now, there's so many things, and just on the topic of my book, the first thing that I would do, quite frankly, is get my book. And the reason I say that is because one of the most important things is educating yourself, and not only educating the person who is living with it, but for people around us, because it is so misunderstood. And so that's the beauty of my book, is that it goes through, of course, what it is and all the things that a person, that a loved one is experiencing. And so for the patient and for the loved one, and even for doctors, that's the first thing I would do if you're newly diagnosed or if you've had it for a long time, because it's very difficult to find information unless you spend weeks, months, years searching for it. And that's why I included it all in the book. So that would be my first step for pretty much for anyone. Next step would be, of course, is to find a good doctor that you can work with and develop a good relationship, and work together with, work with your doctor or with yourself and with your loved ones on accepting it, which is one of the most difficult things for us to do. But once we're able to get to accepting it, then we're not fighting it so much, and the suffering is not nearly as intense. Be as understanding as possible that your loved one is suffering. Even if you don't understand what it feels like physically, emotionally, psychologically, do your best to be understanding that the person with it is struggling and is probably really scared, feels very alone. And so just be there for them, just not to try and fix them, but just to listen to them and just let them know that they're going to be okay, that they're not going to be left alone, that they're going to be taken care of.
Those are great bits of advice. What about somebody who thinks that they might have dystonia, but they haven't been diagnosed with it yet? Should they do anything besides just bring it up to their doctor? What if their doctor's not familiar with it and kind of pushes it to the side? Is there any kind of advice or tests that you recommend at this point?
Well, unfortunately, there are no tests to diagnose dystonia. So if you were to have an MRI, for example, there would be nothing in most cases on the brain that would show that anything is wrong. And so the best thing really, if you believe that you may have it, is to bring it up to whatever doctor that you're seeing, let them know and look into it with them. And then I would seek out a neurologist that specializes in movement disorders, because they're the ones who have the training to diagnose and differentiate between the different disorders. Because, there are similar symptoms with Parkinson's, essential tremor, Huntington's disease, and dystonia, and tremor. And so when you're seeing a movement disorder specialist is what they call them, they have additional training above and beyond just the neurology training. And that's typically the best person to go and see.
Tom, thanks so much for being on the show today. I think that learning about your story and how you transformed and changed your own life and now are helping others is a huge plus to the world. So thank you for sharing that. And I know that somebody listening out there has definitely been impacted and may never have known about it, but now maybe they do and they'll be able to do something with it. So we really appreciate having you here, and thanks so much.
Oh, thank you. And I really do appreciate it very much. Thanks.
Thank you so much for listening to this edition of the Plant Trainers Podcast. Don't forget to subscribe on iTunes, Stitcher, Google Play, or any other podcast listening platforms. We appreciate the feedback we receive from you. Every time we get a 5-star rating or review on iTunes from one of our fans, it ensures other people will find us too. Thanks to our patrons. To become a patron, visit www.patreon.com/planttrainers. Even supporting us with $1 really makes a difference. Connect and follow us on Instagram and Twitter @PlantTrainers. Like Plant Trainers on Facebook, join our newsletter, and check out our website at www.planttrainers.com for awesome plant-based recipes and a list of our services. Email your questions to info@planttrainers.com so we can answer them on our upcoming Facebook Lives. We hope we've inspired you today. Join us again next time, and have a healthy day.